Okay, hello fellow artists. Welcome back to this video. Yes. Anyway, we are going to improve your tonal values. This is not going to work out. Last week we covered understanding values from the masters. So this time, as promised, I'm going to show you some exercises to improve your tonal values. So what I did is turn some of the classic exercises into something a little bit more extra work. Okay, so yeah, you have extra work. Listen, there's no escaping traditional ways of studying, I guess, by really working your butt. There's no magic power potion. We can actually see some progress literally as we go through each exercise. You don't have to do them side by side or all at once, but I did keep in mind that if you were, they go consecutively harder so that you can start at point 0 and move up to move your way up. It's a good way to set expectations. Let's jump in to the first exercise. So we have our pencils. I've got an HB. 8B, woo! Okay, so we can start off by drawing squares. You can grab a ruler if you want. So we're starting from 0 to 10 with a 10% increment between values. 0, 1, 2. We are starting at 0. This is black. And we can't get... On the 1, you're just gonna color it. You can do it however you want. I'm gonna go with a 2H now. So I'm just gonna cover more ground here. And this is the idea, creating your own scale. Okay, so what we want to do now, when we started our value scale, is start the opposite way. So I started with the whites. I'm going to do the exact same thing, but starting with the blacks. So here's my challenge for you. If you do fuck it up, kind of like I did, make a new one. You can either stop where you fucked up and just start anew, or you can continue making the whole thing, see where it is, and start over right below. So I'm going to do a new one and I'll show you how that goes. I don't know if you can or cannot see a difference, but there we are. I was able to gradate these a little bit better. There's not such a sudden jump. The third one now looks a bit like the first one. Now we can get to the actual painting. We're still within the same exercise, and we basically have the same parameters. Just do a scale up and down. I have big tubes, but you really don't need big tubes. Just get the small version. So I have ivory black, titanium white, brushes. I recommend perhaps a square one, normal square brush. You can technically use whatever you want, whatever you have. This will just facilitate the whole process because you will just need to do one swipe. You don't need to be perfect with your squares. I've got my palette ready. I'm gonna get some Sansodor, which is just some paint thinner, and some paper towels. And a tip, don't waste any canvases for these sort of practices. Just use normal paper. You can gesso it if you want. You can use canvas boards, or you can use oil canvas paper. White, you can barely see, but you can see some of the light reflecting on it. Just softly moving upward. And a tip, keep extending your palette. So I'm starting with the white and I'm adding black on the side. So I'm gonna keep extending the paint that way within the same blob of paint. I don't want it to be separate chunks where I can't really tell if one is lighter or darker than the other. It's easier to judge going down like this. So this is what the palette looks like. You see what I was saying? It's basically creating a gradient within the palette. So what we can do now is redo it. And I'm talking about not redoing it the opposite way, not yet. I'm saying redo it so that you can get a hang of it. And now we want to do the opposite, like the same thing we did here. Start from black, end with white. These are the steps you should be taking too. If you fuck up like this, keep it there. Try again. The same thing, but with color. Grab a primary color. I have this red. It can be any sort of red. What you're able to learn now is working with the colors that you have. So you can work with their pigmentation, work with the way they mix with white. You'll be surprised. So there should be a point where the pure red is around the middle. So let's calculate that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Out of 11, that should be around 5 or 6. I think 5 actually. So I know now that I have 3 that are too similar. I need to change these up. Okay, here comes the second exercise. We're going to be drawing the primary shapes. So the sphere, cube, cylinder, and cone. Get a hang of those values with the pencils, and then we're going to do that with painting in black and white. So you can grab a reference if you need to. So there's a caveat to this exercise. We're going to divide the scale into 3 sections, and one of these can overlap. So we're going to repeat each shape 3 times with different lighting. So I suppose I'll start with light values, mid and dark. It won't be a perfect cube, but we're gonna keep going and we're gonna repeat them. So let's lay the land first. And here on this side, we're gonna do a little separation. We're going to do the full spectrum. So we're going to go from the darkest dark to the lightest light here. So first of all, we want to keep in mind where the light is coming from. So I'm going to do all of the light coming from this direction. The one that we can't see is going to be the lightest, followed by the top is the lightest. So we're gonna have some shading on this side. And then we're gonna have our darkest side here. And we're not gonna go too dark because we're using the third of the value scale. What's gonna happen is we're gonna have some shadow being cast. And I can't do the full shape, but let's say this is it. We want to include some shadow occlusion, so we're just gonna press down a little bit under the surface of the cube, because as light bounces off the surfaces, it's gonna go in many different directions, but it won't get under here, right where the surfaces touch. Light cannot get in there. Now, we can do some reflected light, so we can grab a little eraser and pat that thing down. I don't have an eraser at hand. What I'm going to do instead is darken this corner. The light that reflects on the table is going to bounce off on the cube, specifically this region. So I'm going to shade around that region in a bit of a gradient, hopefully. I can do that correctly. Okay, so from the top, again, I'm going to do this sort of light, I suppose, and I'm going to shade this in. I'm going to try to do the pencil work directionally so that it follows the shape of and the volume of the sphere. This line right here, right where the light portion transitions into dark, that's the terminator. And I figured that would be interesting for you guys to know. And here's our cast shadow, our core shadow, sorry. And now we're gonna go for our Cast shadow, remember this is going to be a bit more circular, darker to lighter. The shadow occlusion or occlusion shadow. And we're gonna have some bouncing light here. Darken some of these areas. There's our ring of coarse shadow, some reflected light behind. We have some darker portions down here and reflected light from behind and around. We could even do bouncing light up here, so it would just be the top in shadow. It depends on your light source. With the cylinder, it's like having a large cube with the characteristics of a sphere. So we're dealing with this sort of, oh, well, that's too much. We're dealing with these curves, right? So if the light is coming from up here where I kind of decided to work with, the light is gonna hit this portion and the rest is gonna be in shadow. Some of this is gonna be a little bit darker, where the darkest portion of the shadow would be, with some reflected light coming from behind already. I stepped ahead. We have our terminator line over there. We can even make the bottom a little bit darker, just a bit to give it that volume. The top part, we don't want to touch too much. Maybe the back here we can shade in. You can be more precise if you want. It all depends on how you want to study these regions. Occlusion shadow. So we want to make the shadow occlusion thinner where it's closer to the light, and slightly thicker towards the end, because the bouncing light is going to be weaker on this side because there's shadows, and it's not going to find its way in there. In cone, same thing as the cylinder. We find our terminator more or less around there. We shade in, and this is a triangular shadow. So we have a circular bottom, and we're following those lines. Right, so our shadow on this cone is gonna, and in any cone, starts at the terminator. We find that that's where the most outer point of the curve is, and then the rest is going to be in shadow. It's not a very perfect cone, so that's the theory behind that. We've done our 4 main ones, and we can start going to the mid. I'm gonna include this light portion. My darkest is going to be this. Torture time. So we have all 3 values now, and now we're going to mix all of the scale here with the same sort of lighting. So just trying to get it slightly darker. So this is going to be the lightest value. So let's say it's a 1, this one, the top one. The front facing one, let's say, so this is going to be our shade of 1. Then for this one, we'll try to go somewhere around here on the midtones. Let's say we get a 4. Our other side, a 7, so that we can use the full scale. And then the last one, let's say we have a 9 or 10. It's not our darkest dark. The shadow occlusion will be black, or as close to black as possible. Let me put it in simpler terms. I'm so sorry. 1, 2, and it all depends on the lighting. This will be light, second lightest, third, meaning it's already going into dark, and 4, our shadow will be the darkest. So that will be a 4. But generally speaking, this is what we're following. Let's go back to the other page and continue. I know I should have said that earlier, but yeah. Okay, so more or less this is what our page should look like. Oh, wait, whoops. I forgot to do this. So with painting, we want to do the exact same thing as we did with the drawing. Doing it like this so that you can actually get a sense of what your sketchbook could look like to keep building up with time. It's pretty readable. Thumbnails are extremely helpful, extremely useful. They are just the best way to practice, to plan. They will be your savior. So, to learn values and to plan your values for a piece that you want to create, we can use this simple format of choosing a few markers or pencils. We want to have clear edges because that's kind of the exercise. Is thumbnail, make it readable. We will do black and white, so achromatic. I learned this word recently. Yeah, I don't know. It seems it's a very obvious word, but I've never come across it in my vocabulary for whatever reason. And now I have, and now I want to share that with you. So if you take nothing from this video, at least take achromatic. That's the highlight of this video, achromatic. I recommend starting with 4. Get a sense for it if you haven't really done this exercise. And the kicker here is that afterwards we're going to do it in color. The thumbnail shouldn't be too big. That's the whole point of a thumbnail. Just think of a YouTube thumbnail, think of a TikTok, I guess TikTok thumbnail? I don't know. Are there thumbnails in TikTok? You gotta be kidding me. It was out of shot the entire time. Okay, I'm gonna redo it again. What I did here was simply mark with one value. You can go as light as this. Actually, I'll show you the dark version. You can go as light as this, or you can go really dark like in the comics. And that way, we will start reading the shapes that we're dealing with, how everything relates to one another, only with shape, only with this value, focusing on shadows. And the idea is once you remove the pencil, the shapes are still readable. So I'm going to start with the lighter values. And this is pretty much just what you do. Try to cover the areas. I guess like in a cutout form. You can simplify it to 2, you can simplify it to 3, but do not go more than 4. Things start getting confusing. You don't have to do the halo part of the shadow. You can just mark it with a really dark shadow that there's the shadow. And there's our value little thumbnail study thing. We can do it with landscapes, we can do it with people, anything. So this is more comic style of practicing your shadows and your values. This will show you like the high contrast of certain areas. So perhaps areas where things overlap like that. This is very useful. Here you kind of lose you kind of lose that, but there's pencil and there's a little bit of blurred lines. So I'm gonna try to erase it. I'm gonna try to go soft. Now what we can do is this. Paint the background. Here too. You can do it here too. You can even do that. I suppose just try to mark certain areas and how they go with the lighting. So this, for whatever reason, could be darker, and then this could be lighter. Same with the ground. You can play around. Maybe there's other shapes out of sight, out of frame. Here we do the same thing. You can do that instead. You can do that, I guess. Actually, it might be better. You can play around with how you want to play with the values. You can accentuate certain shadow areas where you know it's definitely dark from the light. Keep it simple. Don't complicate it too much. This will be more useful than this, where you know there's some shadow occlusion or deep shadows, and then it's more readable than that. So that would be my recommendation. And this is your way of practicing your values much better. This is more effective with practicing your shadows. I hope that made sense. This same thing, but with the paint in achromatic. Yes, we got it. We're gonna keep using this word now. Not black and white, just achromatic. And we're going to paint in the same way. We're not blending. We're doing what we did in a previous exercise. Bless me. That was weird. So I have this little big brush. It's like a medium small size. And then we have a smaller one. We are going to do the black and white, the achromatic. Did I misspell that? Does that have an H? I think that's the one. We're doing 4. Again, we can grab different references. Here, we're going to write the color chromatic page. I don't know. Oh my god, monochromatic. If you don't want to use paint thinner, you can always use acrylic paint. However, I do think it would be nice if you were able to work with the medium that you usually want to work on. Yeah, that's just my take on that. What we want to do here is set up 3 tones, maximum 4. We want to start with the darkest areas, so we will do just that. And it's a good thing to have a larger paintbrush. In between paint, just wash it off, because we want to keep that tone as clean as possible. Same exercise as before, right? We're just blocking in. That's the word. We are blocking in the values. No need for blending. No blending in this exercise. Now we're going with the white value. And we're gonna place it covering the entire... Oh. And now we can go in with the lighter value and place it in there, adjacent to the shadows to make them pop. Fix some of the edges if we want, or move on, just to separate the shadow from the circular portion. Okay, there we go, little dabble. With painting we can make bigger thumbnails if we wanted, so I could technically, I'll show you now, start laying it down. Now when we look at the reference, we know what areas need transitioning, which areas would need darkening, and these is, you know, the blocking. So we already know that, for example, here there should be a little bit wider, you know, and just transition from value to value. But we don't want to do that in this exercise. We want to keep it as simple as possible to be able to do that as we keep painting, as we keep getting better. This is what the first page should kind of look like. Just experiment different lighting scenarios, different subjects, different sizes of thumbnails. This is still a thumbnail in painting, but when you're drawing, keep it small like this. Okay, it's the following day. I'm sorry, I couldn't keep up with the whole schedule situation. It was 11 p.m. when I was done last night. I'm going to take this achromatic situation and we're going to turn it into monochromatic. I'm going to look at these thumbnails and make them my reference. Since I have the main values here, I can just go off of that and create the same values but with the red. This is the color that I'm using. It's permanent red light. Pigments PR255. P073. Like, my palette is dirty, so I'm gonna have a little bit of black, so desaturation, but I'm still working with values. So there you have it. I hope this helps you really break down and simplify what you see light-wise and value-wise, and to simplify your shapes into its most basic values the dark, the mid, and the lights. But to learn values and how each plane shifts and how that light corresponds to each plane, then I recommend doing this. And we want it to look choppy, like if we did paper cutouts, or we simplified on Photoshop an image into 3 colors or 3 values. That's what we want. Our job afterwards is to learn how to bring it all together. If I can't think of the word, just add zhuzh. You'll start experimenting with brushwork to be able to get that. This is why it's great. So let's move on. We are going to time ourselves. This is an achromatic exercise. We're not going monochromatic. You can, however, we can go for as many as we want with as many different shapes as we want. Grab a reference and time. So I grabbed this reference off of Pinterest. Do grab a black and white reference. I put the 10-minute mark, so you can give yourself up to 20 minutes, I'd say, because the whole point is to keep it simple, really get the important values that will shape, form, and give dimension to your shapes. I hope that makes sense. If you want, sketch it out first and start the timer when you're actually painting. Get a big brush, get more or less this sort of size, a little bit bigger than your head. I don't know what this measurement is, but your face should fit in it. Don't go too big, don't go too small for this 10-minute exercise. We gotta pick and choose quick what we want to lay there. And as we keep doing them, we'll get better at what we judge, what we put in, and what we don't put in. Alrighty, sketch time. That's it. So what you can do now after is judge it. And if you want, you can make the corrections. And if you don't, then you can just keep doing more. There you go. That's a bit better. If you want to, you can just keep doing these types of exercises. There we have it. A 10-minute study on tonal values. As a beginner or as a warm-up, this is a decent way to start. Keep moving up the ladder and keep getting better. First up, try painting achromatic from a colorful photo. Whatever reference you have, either live or picture. It will help you judge the tonal values better. It will be very difficult. I still struggle with this. It's not my forte. However, it is very helpful if it's something that you tend to struggle with. Number 2, paint a portrait in 10 minutes and paint a landscape in 10 minutes. So 20 minutes of your time in an A4 each. So you'll end up with 2 paintings. These references should be in color. Grab whatever you want though. You'll still have to simplify a lot because an A4 is the size of a sheet of paper. You're gonna have to reduce every element to its simplest shapes and simplest values. Figure out a way to do that in 10 minutes. Don't focus on any detail. Number 3. A palette knife painting. Which technically should have been number 1, but anyway, this will force you to not blend when you're on the canvas. I mean, you can blend with palette knives, you can do many things with palette knives, experiment with them, have all freedom. But the point of this exercise is to not blend, and many of these exercises is to not blend so that we can focus on the targeted area. Yeah, boy. So these were all the exercises I could muster at the moment. I hope it was useful. I hope you took something out of it. Let me know if you prefer more tutorial-y things like this or anything else that you're more interested. So things you are struggling with in painting, let me know. because I have a few things planned up ahead, and I'd like to hear more from you about what you'd like to see as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope these exercises go well for you, and keep learning and keep getting better. With that, I'll see you in the next one. Happy painting!